The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape of Flagstaff, Arizona, as Martha Rodriguez pulled her cleaning supplies from the back of her weathered Honda Civic. It was Tuesday, just like any other Tuesday in her 15-year career as a professional house cleaner. She had built her reputation on being thorough, reliable and discreet, qualities that made her the preferred cleaner for several Airbnb properties in the area. Martha had cleaned this particular property, a charming adobe-style house on Desert Rose Lane, dozens of times before. The owner, David Chen, was one of her favorite clients. He was always punctual with payments, never complained about her work, and treated her with the kind of respect that seemed increasingly rare in her line of work. The house itself was a gem. 2 bedrooms, southwestern decor, and a spectacular view of the San Francisco peaks that left guests writing glowing reviews about their Arizona experience. As she approached the front door, Martha noticed something that made her pause. Usually, when she arrived for a turnover cleaning, there were clear signs that the previous guests had departed. No cars in the driveway, curtains open to let in the morning light. That empty feeling that houses get when people have packed up their lives and moved on. But today felt different. The curtains were still drawn. A rental car, a silver Toyota Camry, sat in the driveway as if its owner had just stepped inside for a moment. Martha checked her phone to confirm the timing. According to her schedule, the guest checkout had been 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks. That couldn't be right. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages with David. Sure enough, he had texted her a month ago saying the guest would be staying 5 nights and would check out on Sunday morning. The cleaning was scheduled for Tuesday to give the guest time to depart and for any last-minute issues to be resolved. But here it was, 4 Tuesdays later, and the car was still there. Martha's hands trembled slightly as she inserted the key into the lock. In all her years of cleaning, she had encountered forgotten items, unexpected messes, even the occasional guest who overstayed by a few hours. But nothing like this. The key turned easily, and the door swung open with a soft creak that seemed to echo through the silent house. The first thing that hit her was the stillness. Not just quiet, stillness. The kind of stillness that feels heavy, pregnant with secrets. The air was stale, carrying the faint scent of coffee that had long since gone cold, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Something that made her nose wrinkle and her stomach tighten with unease. Martha stepped inside, her cleaning supplies clutched tightly in her hands like a shield. The living room looked normal at first glance. The couch cushions were slightly indented, as if someone had been sitting there recently. A coffee mug sat on the table, a ring of dried liquid marking its bottom. The television remote lay on the arm of the chair, and a paperback romance novel was splayed open, spine up, on the side table. But it was what she saw when she moved toward the bedroom that made her heart skip a beat. 2 suitcases, one large, one medium-sized, sat in the corner of the room, clearly packed and ready for departure. The zippers were closed, luggage tags still attached, as if their owner had been preparing to leave but had simply vanished mid-preparation. On the bed, clothes were laid out neatly, a pair of jeans, a southwestern-style blouse and undergarments. Everything you'd arranged the night before an early morning checkout. Martha's breathing became shallow as she took in more details. A laptop. Computer sat open on the small desk by the window, its screen black, but for a small light, indicating it was still plugged in and charging. Next to it, a cell phone charger was connected to the wall, but no phone. Reading glasses were folded neatly beside a guidebook about Route 66, with several pages marked by colorful sticky notes. The bathroom revealed even more unsettling evidence of an interrupted life. Toiletries were arranged on the counter. Toothbrush, still damp. Makeup bag unzipped with several items scattered, as if the woman had been getting ready but stopped mid-routine. A towel hung over the shower door, and the mirror still bore the faint streaks of someone having wiped away steam after a hot shower. But it was the shoes that truly unnerved Martha. A pair of comfortable walking sandals sat beside the bed, positioned as if their owner had just stepped out of them before lying down for the night. They were placed with the kind of unconscious precision that speaks of routine, of someone who had settled in and made the space their own. Martha backed out of the bedroom, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the sound would wake the entire neighborhood. She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands and dialed David's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before his familiar voice answered. "Martha, is everything okay? You sound—" "David," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have a problem, a big problem. The guest, her things are still here. Everything is still here." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When David spoke again, his voice had changed, taking on the careful tone people use when they're trying to process information that doesn't make sense. "What do you mean, still there? The checkout was a month ago. I confirmed it with her via the app. Her suitcases are packed, David. Her clothes are laid out like she was planning to leave. But everything else, it's like she just vanished. The rental car is in the driveway. Her laptop is still charging. There's a damp towel in the bathroom." Martha could hear David's sharp intake of breath through the phone. She imagined him in his office in Phoenix, staring at his computer screen, trying to make sense of what she was telling him. "Stay there," he said finally. "Don't touch anything else. I'm calling the authorities. And Martha, thank you for calling. Me first." After hanging up, Martha found herself unable to leave the house, despite every instinct telling her to run. Something about the stillness held her there, as if the walls themselves were trying to tell her a story. She wandered back through the rooms, this time paying attention to smaller details. In the kitchen, a single coffee cup sat in the sink, rinsed but not washed. The coffee maker was clean, but when Martha opened the cabinet above it, she found a bag of coffee beans with several scoops missing. Someone had been making coffee regularly during their stay. The refrigerator contained the kind of items that told the story of a solo traveler trying to eat economically. A container of yogurt with 2 servings missing, a loaf of bread with several slices gone, sandwich meat, and a bottle of wine with about 1/3 consumed. Everything spoke of routine, of someone who had settled in for a comfortable stay. It was the small notepad by the kitchen phone that caught Martha's attention next. In neat handwriting, someone had written a list. "Call Mom Thursday, pick up. Postcards, visit Sunset Point, check car oil." Below that, in different colored ink, were phone numbers for local restaurants and attractions. The kind of notes a careful traveler makes to organize their time and make the most of their vacation. As Martha studied the notepad more closely, she noticed something that made her stomach clench. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting that looked more hurried, more urgent than the rest, were the words, "Feeling watched. Can't shake it, maybe just tired." The sound of sirens in the distance broke through Martha's concentration. As she waited for the authorities to arrive, she couldn't stop thinking about that last note. Feeling watched. The words seemed to echo through the empty house, adding weight to the stillness that had unsettled her from the moment she opened the door. When the police officers arrived, followed closely by David in his pickup truck, Martha felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that she was no longer alone with whatever story this house was trying to tell, and dread because she knew that whatever had happened here was far from ordinary. Officer Rebecca Santos, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair, took careful notes as Martha explained what she had found. David provided the guest information: Kathy Williams, 53 years old, from Sacramento, California. She was traveling alone, documenting her journey along Route 66 for what she had described in her booking message as a midlife adventure. She seemed so excited about the trip, David told Officer Santos, scrolling through their message exchange on his phone. She asked for recommendations about local attractions, wanted to know the best times to catch the sunset. She even asked about hiking trails suitable for someone who wasn't an experienced hiker but wanted to challenge herself. Officer Santos made careful notes of everything, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When she finished with David and Martha, she spent nearly an hour photographing and documenting everything in the house. She paid particular attention to the laptop and the notepad with its ominous final entry. As the afternoon wore on, more officials arrived. A detective, a crime scene technician, and eventually a missing persons specialist. Each brought their own perspective to the mystery, but none could offer an explanation that satisfied the growing unease that seemed to permeate the house. It was Detective Michael Torres who first voiced what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say. In 30 years of police work, he said, standing in the living room and looking around at the preserved scene of Kathy Williams' interrupted life, I've seen people disappear for all kinds of reasons. Mental health crises, family problems, financial troubles, desire to start over. But they usually take something with them. A favorite piece of jewelry, important documents, cash, he gestured around the room. This looks like someone who was planning to be right back. The investigation officially began that evening. David was asked to provide all communication with Kathy, including her booking requests, payment information, and any reviews she had left for other properties. Her last communication with him had been 3 days into her stay, a message thanking him for the restaurant recommendation and mentioning how peaceful the area was. Meanwhile, Officer Santos began the delicate process of contacting Kathy's emergency contact, listed in her Airbnb profile as her sister Linda Williams Peterson in Sacramento. The phone call that evening would shatter Linda's world and set in motion a chain of events that would bring national attention to a case that seemed to defy explanation. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that Kathy Williams had apparently fallen in love with, Martha finally gathered her unused cleaning supplies and prepared to leave. The house that had been her workplace for years now felt like something else entirely. A puzzle with missing pieces, a story with torn pages. Before driving away, Martha paused to look back at the house one more time. In the gathering twilight, with its curtains still drawn and the rental car sitting silent in the driveway, it looked almost normal. Almost. But Martha knew she would never be able to look at it the same way again. As she drove home through the desert darkness, Martha couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in those silent rooms, Kathy Williams' story was still unfolding. The question that would haunt everyone involved in the case was simple, yet terrifying. If Kathy Williams wasn't in her temporary home, where was she? And perhaps more importantly, what had convinced a woman who seemed to be enjoying her dream vacation to walk away from everything she owned and disappear into the vast Arizona landscape without a trace? The first day of the investigation was ending, but the mystery was just beginning. And in a small house on Desert Rose Lane, the silence seemed to grow deeper, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for someone to uncover the truth about what had happened to the woman who had simply vanished from her own life. Linda Williams Peterson had been preparing for bed when her phone rang that Tuesday night. Working as a registered nurse at UC Davis Medical Center meant early mornings and long shifts, so she typically turned off her phone by 9 p.m. But something, perhaps a sister's intuition, made her glance at the caller ID before setting it on the nightstand. The Arizona area code made her heart skip. Kathy was supposed to be driving home from her Route 66 adventure. She should have been back in Sacramento by now, probably exhausted, but full of stories about her solo journey through the American Southwest. "Hello?" Linda answered, expecting to hear her sister's voice bubbling with excitement about roadside diners and desert sunsets. Instead, she heard Officer Rebecca Santos introducing herself and explaining that there had been an incident involving her sister. The words seemed to come from very far away, filtered through a growing sense of unreality that Linda would later describe as feeling like she was underwater, trying to understand sounds from the surface. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" Linda found herself saying, even though she had heard every word clearly. Sometimes our minds need time to catch up with information that threatens to reshape our entire world. Officer Santos was patient and kind, explaining the situation in careful, measured terms. Kathy's belongings had been found in her rental property. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of foul play, but Kathy herself was nowhere to be found. Her rental car was still in the driveway. Her scheduled checkout had been a month ago. "A month?" Linda's voice cracked. "But that's impossible. She was only staying 5 days. She was supposed to be home by now. I've been expecting her to call and tell me all about her trip." As the details sank in, Linda felt the familiar weight of responsibility that had defined her relationship with her younger sister for most of their lives. At 55, Linda was 2 years older than Kathy and had always been the more practical, more cautious of the two. She was the one who balanced checkbooks, remembered appointments, and worried about all the things that Kathy seemed to approach with an almost childlike optimism. "When did you last speak with your sister, Officer?" Santos asked. Gently, Linda had to think. The days since Kathy's departure had blurred together in the routine of work and family obligations. It was about a week into her trip. Maybe 10 days ago. She called to tell me about some amazing sunset she'd photographed and how she'd met a nice older couple at a diner who gave her recommendations for other stops. She sounded so happy. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Officer Santos gathering background information about Kathy's mental state, her financial situation, any recent stresses or relationship problems that might explain a sudden decision to disappear. But Linda found herself struggling to provide the kind of concerning details that might make sense of the situation. Kathy was excited about this trip for months, Linda explained. After her divorce was finalized. Last year, she said she wanted to do something just for herself, something adventurous. She'd never traveled alone before, but she was determined to prove to herself that she could handle it. She researched every stop, read travel blogs, bought new luggage. This wasn't impulsive. It was her dream. After the call ended, Linda sat in her darkened living room for a long time, trying to process what she had learned. Kathy vanished. It seemed impossible. Her sister was many things, spontaneous, optimistic, sometimes impractical. But she wasn't careless. She wouldn't just walk away from her obligations, her life, her family, without a word. The next morning, Linda called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and began making arrangements to fly to Arizona. As a nurse, she was accustomed to crisis situations, but this felt different. This was her baby sister, and Linda had no medical protocols to follow, no established procedures to guide her through the maze of fear and uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm her. While waiting for her flight at Sacramento International Airport, Linda found herself scrolling through Kathy's social media posts from the trip. Her sister had been documenting her journey with the enthusiasm of someone finally living a long-held dream. There were photos of quirky roadside attractions, spectacular desert landscapes, and Kathy herself looking happier and more confident than Linda had seen her in years. The last post was from the sunset point near her Airbnb, dated 11 days earlier. The photo showed a breathtaking Arizona sunset with the caption, "I never want to leave this magical place." Sometimes you find exactly what you didn't know you were looking for. The Route 66 dreams, desert sunsets, 50, and fearless. Reading those words now, with the knowledge of what had happened since, made Linda's stomach twist with anxiety. Had Kathy meant something more than the usual travel enthusiasm? Was there something in her sister's state of mind that Linda had missed? The flight to Phoenix seemed endless. Linda spent the time making lists, the way she always dealt with overwhelming situations, lists of people to call, questions to ask, actions to take. But this wasn't a medical emergency with clear protocols and established treatments. This was her sister's life, reduced to a mystery that no amount of organization could solve. Detective Torres met Linda at the Flagstaff police station that afternoon. He was a soft-spoken man with intelligent eyes and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he had delivered difficult news to families many times before. He walked her through everything they knew, showed her photographs of Kathy's belongings as they had been found, and listened patiently as Linda provided more details about her sister's background and personality. "Your sister seems to have been a very methodical person," Detective Torres observed, showing Linda photos of the neat arrangement of clothes and the carefully packed suitcases. "Everything suggests someone who was planning to check out as scheduled. Whatever happened, it wasn't planned." Linda studied the photographs with the analytical eye she brought to her nursing work, looking for details that might provide clues. It was strange to see her sister's life laid out in evidence photos. The purple blouse Kathy had bought specifically for the trip, the guidebook with her careful annotations, the reading glasses their mother had given her last Christmas. "That notepad," Linda said, pointing to a photo that showed the kitchen counter. "Kathy always made lists when she traveled. She was afraid of forgetting something important or missing out on a recommended experience." Detective Torres pulled out the original notepad, now sealed in an evidence bag. Linda could see her sister's handwriting clearly through the plastic, the neat, controlled script that Kathy had maintained since childhood. And then, at the bottom, those troubling final words, "Feeling watched, can't shake it, maybe just tired." When you spoke with her during the trip, Detective Torres asked, did she mention feeling uncomfortable, unsafe? Any concerns about other guests or people she'd encountered? Linda shook her head slowly. "No, nothing like that. She talked about how peaceful it was, how different from the city. She said she was sleeping better than she had in months. She mentioned loving the silence at night because she could hear all the desert sounds, coyotes, wind, things she'd never noticed before." The detective made notes, then looked up with the kind of expression that suggested he was about to share information that would be difficult to hear. "Ms. Williams-Peterson, there's something else we need to discuss. We've been canvassing the neighborhood, talking to the other residents about whether they noticed anything unusual during the time your sister was staying there." Linda felt her stomach tighten. What did they find? Several neighbors reported hearing sounds from the house during the early morning hours, even after your sister should have checked out. Sounds that seemed unusual. Detective Torres consulted his notes before continuing. One neighbor, a retired veteran named Robert Morrison, reported hearing what he described as chanting or repetitive vocalizations between 2 and 3 a.m. on multiple nights. He assumed it was related to your sister's stay, but the timing suggests these sounds continued well after she disappeared. "Chanting?" Linda repeated, the word feeling foreign in her mouth. "That doesn't make any sense. Kathy wasn't religious in any conventional way. She certainly wouldn't have been chanting." Another neighbor, Mrs. Helen Kowalski, reported seeing lights in the house turning on and off at irregular intervals, particularly in the bathroom. Again, this was after the date your sister was supposed to have left. Linda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the police station. Are you saying someone else was in the house after Kathy disappeared? We're not sure what we're saying yet, Detective Torres replied carefully. We're still gathering information and trying to piece together a timeline. But yes, there's evidence to suggest that activity continued in the house after your sister's scheduled departure date. The implications of this information settled over Linda like a heavy blanket. If someone else had been in Kathy's rental house, what had happened to her sister? And why would someone remain in a property after its rightful occupant had vanished? We've also found fingerprints, Detective Torres continued, on the back door of the property. Prints that don't match your sister, the property owner, or the cleaning service. Someone else was there, someone who used the rear entrance. Linda's hands were shaking now, and she clasped them together to try to regain some control. What does that mean? Did you think someone hurt her? We're exploring all possibilities, Detective Torres said gently. But I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. We've contacted the FBI's Missing Persons Unit, and we're coordinating with law enforcement agencies throughout the region. We're also working with your sister's cell phone provider to track her last known location. The rest of the afternoon was spent going through Kathy's belongings. Linda was asked to identify everything and note if anything seemed to be missing. It was a heartbreaking task, seeing her sister's carefully planned vacation reduced to evidence. Bags and inventory lists, everything seemed to be there. Kathy's jewelry, her camera with photos from the trip, her wallet with credit cards and cash intact, even her prescription medications. Whatever had happened to Kathy, it wasn't a robbery. And the presence of her medications suggested that her disappearance hadn't been planned. She takes those blood pressure pills every morning, Linda told Detective Torres, pointing to the prescription bottle. She's been on that medication for 5 years. She wouldn't go anywhere without them, especially not for weeks. As evening approached, Linda found herself at the Airbnb property, accompanied by Detective Torres and Officer Santos. David Chen, the property owner, met them there, his face creased with worry and something that looked like guilt. I keep thinking I should have checked sooner, David said, as they stood in the driveway looking at Kathy's abandoned rental car. When the cleaning service called, I assumed it was just a scheduling mix-up. I never imagined... Linda approached the house with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. Part of her expected to see Kathy emerge from the front door, laughing about a miscommunication or a spontaneous extended stay. But the drawn curtains and empty stillness told a different story. Inside, Linda could feel her sister's presence everywhere. The coffee mug in the sink was one Kathy had bought their mother for her birthday. Kathy always traveled with a few meaningful items. The romance novel on the side table was the latest book by Kathy's favorite author, purchased specifically for the trip. The clothes laid out on the bed were the outfit Kathy had planned to wear for her drive home. Standing in the bedroom where her sister had spent her last known nights, Linda was overwhelmed by the sense of a life interrupted. Not ended, interrupted. As if Kathy had simply stepped outside for a moment and would return any minute to pack her bags and continue her journey home. But as the hours passed and the reality of the situation settled in, Linda began to understand that her sister's story had taken a turn that no amount of careful planning could have anticipated. Somewhere between the excitement of her last social media post and the scheduled checkout date that never came, Kathy Williams had walked out of her own life and into a mystery that would challenge everything Linda thought she knew about her sister and the world she had believed was predictable and safe. That night, as Linda sat in a hotel room 50 miles away from where her sister had last been seen, she began to understand that her life, too, had been irrevocably changed. The sister she had worried about and protected, The woman who had finally found the courage to travel alone and pursue her dreams had somehow vanished into the vast Arizona desert, leaving behind only questions and the growing certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The investigation into Kathy Williams' disappearance entered its second week with a discovery that would transform the case from a missing person incident to something far more disturbing. Detective Torres had been working methodically through the evidence when a call came in from the Phoenix FBI field office that changed everything. Special Agent Maria Gonzalez arrived in Flagstaff on a Thursday morning with a file that would shake the foundations of what everyone thought they knew about Kathy's disappearance. Agent Gonzalez was a specialist in missing persons cases with unusual circumstances, and her presence indicated that the FBI had identified patterns that local law enforcement might have missed. "We need to talk," she told Detective Torres as they sat in the conference room at the Flagstaff Police Department. "Your missing person case has some troubling similarities to other incidents we've been tracking." Agent Gonzalez opened her file and spread out several photographs and documents across the table. The first photo showed a different woman, younger than Kathy, with short blonde hair and a bright smile. According to the attached report, her name was Jennifer Martinez, and she had disappeared 3 years earlier while staying at an Airbnb property in the same general area of Flagstaff. Jennifer was 38, traveling alone, documenting her journey on social media just like your victim, Agent Gonzalez explained. She was staying at a property approximately half a mile from where Kathy Williams disappeared. Detective Torres studied the file with growing unease. The similarities were striking. Jennifer had been on a solo road trip, taking time off after a difficult divorce to rediscover herself, according to her family. She'd been scheduled to stay 4 nights, but had vanished sometime during her 3rd night. Her belongings were found undisturbed, her rental car in the driveway, no signs of struggle or foul play. "What happened to the investigation?" Detective Torres asked. "It went cold," Agent Gonzalez replied grimly. "No witnesses, no evidence of where she might have gone, no activity on her credit cards or phone after the disappearance. She simply vanished. The local assumption was that she had chosen to disappear, start a new life somewhere else, but her family never believed that theory." The second file contained information that made Detective Torres's stomach clench. 2 more women, both solo travelers, both staying in short-term rental properties within a 5-mile radius of Kathy's Airbnb. One had disappeared 18 months ago, the other just 7 months before Kathy's arrival in Flagstaff. 4 women in 3 years, Agent Gonzalez said quietly. All traveling alone, all staying in vacation rental properties, all vanishing without a trace. The geographic clustering is too significant to be coincidental. Detective Torres felt the weight of this revelation settling over the case like a storm cloud. What they had initially treated as an isolated missing person case was potentially part of something much larger and more sinister. "There's more," Agent Gonzalez continued, pulling out another set of documents. "We've been analyzing the rental properties where these disappearances occurred. 3 of the 4 were managed by the same property management company, Desert Rose Rentals. Kathy Williams was staying at a property managed by the owner directly," Detective Torres noted. "Yes, but here's what's interesting. David Chen, the owner of the property where Ms. Williams stayed, used to work for Desert Rose Rentals. He managed properties for them for 2 years before going independent and acquiring his own rental. The implications were staggering. Detective Torres found himself re-examining everything he thought he knew about David Chen, the soft-spoken property owner who had seemed genuinely concerned about Kathy's disappearance. Meanwhile, Linda Williams Peterson had extended her stay in Arizona indefinitely, taking a leave of absence from her nursing job to coordinate the search efforts. She had rented a small apartment in Flagstaff and was spending her days talking to anyone who might have information about her sister's disappearance. It was Linda who made the next significant discovery. While reviewing Kathy's social media posts for the 100th time, looking for any detail she might have missed, she noticed something in the background of one of her sister's photos. It was a picture Kathy had taken of her dinner at a local restaurant, but visible through the window behind her was a man in a dark baseball cap who appeared to be watching the restaurant from across the street. Linda might have dismissed it as coincidence, except that when she looked more carefully at other photos from Kathy's trip, she began to notice the same figure in several shots. Always in the background, always partially obscured, but unmistakably the same person. Someone had been following her sister. She immediately took her discovery to Detective Torres, who had the photos analyzed by the FBI's image enhancement specialists. What they found was deeply unsettling. The figure appeared in photos taken over a span of 4 days, suggesting that Kathy had been under surveillance for most of her stay in Arizona. "Your sister was very thorough in documenting her trip," Agent Gonzalez observed as they reviewed the enhanced images. "She took photos of everything: her meals, the scenery, the places she visited. She may have inadvertently created a record of her stalker." The realization that Kathy had been followed, possibly from the beginning of her stay, cast her final note about feeling watched in a much more sinister light. She hadn't been paranoid or tired. She had been genuinely in danger. The investigation now focused on identifying the man in the photographs. His face was never clearly visible, but the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit created a profile based on his appearance and actions. He was likely a local resident, familiar with the area and the vacation rental industry. He had the patience and skill to conduct surveillance without being detected, suggesting either law enforcement training or extensive experience in similar activities. As news of the investigation spread through the tight-knit Flagstaff community, more witnesses began to come forward. A local shop owner remembered seeing a man matching the suspect's description, asking questions about solo female travelers. A restaurant server recalled a customer who seemed unusually interested in women dining alone, often asking if they were staying nearby. Most disturbing of all was the testimony of Margaret Thompson, a local delivery driver who had been working the Desert Rose Lane area for several years. She remembered multiple occasions when she had delivered packages to vacant rental properties and noticed a man in dark clothing walking through the neighborhoods, apparently taking note of which houses were occupied and which were empty. "He never approached me directly," Margaret told investigators. "But there was something about the way he moved, the way he seemed to be cataloging information, that made me uncomfortable. I started making note of him in my delivery logs because he appeared so frequently." Margaret's delivery logs, when cross-referenced with the disappearance dates, showed that the mysterious figure had been active in the area during each of the 4 incidents. The pattern was becoming clear, but the identity of the man remained frustratingly elusive. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Robert Morrison, the neighbor who had reported hearing strange chanting sounds, approached Detective Torres with additional information. He had been hesitant to share it initially because it seemed unrelated to the missing person case, but the revelation that this might be connected to other disappearances had prompted him to reconsider. "About 6 months ago," Robert explained, "I was having trouble sleeping and was up late in my workshop. It was around 2 in the morning when I heard voices coming from the direction of the rental properties. I looked out my window and saw flashlights moving around behind one of the houses." Robert had assumed it was late arriving guests or maintenance workers, but the memory had stuck with him because of the secretive nature of the activity. When he saw the same lights again a few weeks later, he had been curious enough to investigate. "I walked over to see what was happening," Robert continued. "There were two men, and they seemed to be examining the back entrance of one of the rental houses. When they saw me coming, they turned off their flashlights and disappeared into the desert. The whole thing felt wrong." Robert's description of one of the men matched the figure from Kathy's photographs. More importantly, his account suggested that whatever was happening to these women involved multiple people working together. The investigation now expanded to include a search of the desert areas behind the rental properties. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, teams began systematically searching the rugged terrain where Robert had seen the mysterious figures disappear. What they found wasn't bodies, but something almost as disturbing. Hidden in a wash, about half a mile behind the rental properties, investigators discovered a crude campsite that appeared to have been used repeatedly over several years. The site included camping gear, surveillance equipment, and most chilling of all, a collection of photographs. The photographs were of women staying at various rental properties in the area. Some of the photos showed the women going about their daily activities, apparently unaware they were being watched. Others were taken through windows at night, showing women sleeping or preparing for bed. Among the collection were dozens of photos of Kathy Williams. Agent Gonzalez coordinated the analysis of the campsite evidence while Detective Torres focused on identifying the subjects in the photographs. Many of the women were eventually contacted and confirmed that they had stayed in the area but had never reported feeling unsafe or being watched. They had been surveilled without their knowledge, and only luck had prevented them from becoming victims. As the investigation continued, a profile emerged of what appeared to be an organized operation targeting solo female travelers. The perpetrators had intimate knowledge of the vacation rental industry, access to booking information, and the patience to conduct extended surveillance before acting. The most terrifying aspect of the discovery was the realization that this had been going on for years. The campsite showed evidence of long-term use, and the photograph collection included images dating back at least 5 years. Kathy Williams and the other missing women were not random victims. They had been specifically selected and targeted. Linda Williams-Peterson, when informed of these developments, experienced a mixture of horror and relief. Horror at the realization that her sister had been the victim of predators who had been operating in the shadows for years. But relief that Kathy's instinct about being watched had been correct. Her sister hadn't been paranoid or imagining things. She had been genuinely in danger and had tried to document her concerns. She was always so intuitive about people, Linda told Detective Torres as they reviewed the evidence. Even as a child, she could sense when something was wrong. I just wish she had trusted that instinct enough to leave. As the third week of the investigation concluded, law enforcement had a much clearer picture of what had happened to Kathy Williams, but they were no closer to finding her or her captors. The desert had swallowed up both the victims and the perpetrators, leaving behind only evidence of a carefully planned operation that had been targeting vulnerable women for years. The case had evolved from a simple missing person investigation to a multi-agency manhunt for what appeared to be an organized predatory group. And somewhere in the vast Arizona wilderness, Kathy Williams and potentially other victims remained missing, their fates unknown, their families left to grapple with the horrifying realization that the desert they had thought was beautiful and peaceful had been hiding something dark and predatory all along. 3 weeks into the investigation, the discovery of the surveillance campsite had transformed the search for Kathy Williams into a federal manhunt. The FBI had taken the lead, coordinating with local law enforcement agencies across 3 states to track down what they now believe to be an organized group responsible for multiple disappearances. Agent Gonzalez had assembled a task force that included specialists in organized crime, human trafficking, and behavioral analysis. The scope of the operation was becoming clear. This wasn't the work of a single individual, but rather a sophisticated network that had been operating in the shadows of the vacation rental industry for years. The breakthrough that would eventually crack the case came from an unexpected source. Lisa Anderson, a digital forensics specialist with the FBI, had been analyzing the metadata from the photographs found at the campsite when she discovered something the investigators had missed. Embedded in the digital files were geolocation coordinates that had been automatically recorded by the camera when the photos were taken. Most people don't realize that their cameras are creating a digital breadcrumb trail, Lisa explained to the task force. Every photo contains hidden information about when and where it was taken. These coordinates could lead us directly to where the perpetrators have been operating. The coordinates revealed a pattern of activity centered around a remote area of the Coconino National Forest, approximately 30 miles northeast of Flagstaff. Satellite imagery showed several abandoned mining structures and a network of dirt roads that would provide perfect isolation for criminal activity. Meanwhile, Linda Williams Peterson had become an unofficial liaison between the families of the missing women and law enforcement. She had contacted the families of Jennifer Martinez and the other victims, forming a support network of people united by shared tragedy and determination to find answers. It was during one of these conversations that Linda learned something that would prove crucial to the investigation. Jennifer Martinez's sister, Rosa, mentioned that Jennifer had been contacted through social media by someone claiming to be a local photographer who specialized in capturing the essence of solo female travelers. Jennifer was flattered, Rosa explained during a phone call with Linda. This person said they had seen her posts about her trip and wanted to arrange a photo session in a beautiful desert location. Jennifer was excited about having professional photos to commemorate her journey. Linda felt a chill of recognition. Kathy had mentioned being contacted by someone offering to show her a spectacular sunset viewing spot that wasn't on any tourist maps. At the time, Linda had worried about her sister meeting strangers, but Kathy had assured her that she was being careful and would meet the person in a public place first. This information led to a review of all the victims' social media accounts and email communications. The FBI's cybercrimes unit discovered that each of the women had been contacted by accounts that traced back to the same IP addresses. The perpetrators had been using social media to identify and contact potential victims, building trust through shared interests in travel and photography before luring them to isolated locations. They were hunting, Agent Gonzalez explained to Linda during one of their regular briefings. Using social media like a catalog to select victims who fit their criteria, solo female travelers, staying alone, documenting their journeys online. Your sister and the others weren't random targets, they were specifically chosen. The investigation now focused on the remote mining area identified by the photo coordinates. Aerial surveillance revealed several vehicles hidden among the abandoned structures, and thermal imaging detected signs of recent human activity in areas that should have been deserted. The raid was planned for dawn on a Tuesday morning, exactly a month after Martha Rodriguez had first discovered Kathy's abandoned belongings. Multiple law enforcement agencies coordinated the operation, approaching the mining complex from several directions to prevent escape routes from being used. What they found in the abandoned mining structures was both a law enforcement success and a tragedy that would haunt everyone involved for years to come. The perpetrators had converted several underground tunnels into a complex that included living quarters, storage areas, and holding cells. Evidence suggested that the operation had been running for at least 8 years, far longer than anyone had suspected. 3 men were arrested at the site: Marcus Webb, a former property manager for Desert Rose Rentals; Daniel Crawford, a local photographer who had been using his legitimate business as cover; and Thomas Henley, who had worked for various vacation rental companies throughout the region. All 3 had clean criminal records and had been pillars of their respective communities, making their crimes all the more shocking. But the most important discovery was the rescue of 2 women who were found alive in the underground complex. One was Jennifer Martinez, who had been held captive for 3 years. The other was Sarah Chen, a victim whose disappearance had never been reported because she had been estranged from her family. Both women were severely traumatized and required immediate medical attention, but they were alive. Their rescue provided the first ray of hope in an investigation that had been marked by heartbreak and frustration. However, the question that haunted Linda and everyone involved in the case remained unanswered. Where was Kathy Williams? Under interrogation, the 3 men initially refused to cooperate, but as the evidence mounted and they realized the severity of their situation, Marcus Webb, the apparent leader of the group, finally agreed to provide information in exchange for a plea agreement. What he revealed was a horrifying account of a predatory operation that had been targeting vulnerable women for nearly a decade. The group had developed sophisticated methods for identifying potential victims through social media analysis, then using fake personas to establish contact and build trust before luring the women to isolated locations. Most of them we kept, Webb said during his confession, his words delivered in a flat, emotionless tone that chilled everyone in the interrogation room. But sometimes they fought too hard. Sometimes they couldn't be controlled. It was then that Webb revealed the location where Kathy Williams could be found. Not alive, as Linda had desperately hoped, but in a shallow grave in the ET desert, 50 miles from where she had vanished. She had been taken to the mining complex like the others, but had attempted to escape during her first night of captivity. In the struggle that followed, she had sustained injuries that proved fatal. The recovery of Kathy's remains brought Linda the closure she had desperately needed, but at a cost that would forever change her understanding of the world. Her sister, the woman who had finally found the courage to pursue her dreams and travel alone, had fallen victim to predators who had been stalking the very communities where she had thought she would find adventure and beauty. The funeral service for Kathy Williams was held in Sacramento on a sunny Saturday morning that reminded Linda of the Arizona sunsets her sister had loved so much. Jennifer Martinez, still recovering from her ordeal but determined to honor the woman whose disappearance had ultimately led to her rescue, attended the service along with representatives from the other families affected by the case. "Your sister saved my life," Jennifer told Linda after the service. "If you hadn't pushed so hard for answers, if you hadn't refused to accept that she had just vanished, I would still be in that place. She died fighting for her freedom, and that fight eventually freed me." The trial of the 3 men became a media sensation, highlighting the vulnerabilities faced by solo female travelers and the sophisticated methods used by predators to exploit social media and the vacation rental industry. All 3 were eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the aftermath of the case, significant changes were implemented in how vacation rental platforms screen both properties and guests. New safety protocols were established, and law enforcement agencies developed better communication systems for tracking patterns in missing persons cases across jurisdictional boundaries. Linda Williams Peterson returned to her nursing career, but also became an advocate for missing persons cases and travel safety. She established the Kathy Williams Foundation, which provides resources and support for families of missing persons and promotes awareness of safety issues related to solo travel. The house on Desert Rose Lane where Kathy had stayed was never rented again. David Chen, devastated by his unwitting role in the tragedy, sold the property to the city of Flagstaff, which converted it into a memorial garden honoring victims of violent crime. A plaque near the entrance bears Kathy's favorite quote about travel: "Adventure awaits those brave enough to seek it." Years later, Linda would often visit the memorial garden when she traveled to Arizona for foundation work. Standing among the desert plants that Kathy had found so beautiful, Linda would remember her sister not as a victim, but as a brave woman who had pursued her dreams despite the risks and whose determination to document her concerns had ultimately helped save other lives. The case of the Arizona desert disappearances became a turning point in how law enforcement approaches missing persons cases involving solo travelers. It highlighted the importance of taking seriously the intuitive concerns of victims, the value of thorough investigation even when cases seem routine, and the need for better coordination between agencies when patterns emerge across jurisdictional boundaries. But perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated the power of families who refuse to give up, who demand answers even when those answers seem impossible to find. Linda Williams, Peterson's determination to understand what had happened to her sister, had not only brought Kathy home, but had also rescued other victims and prevented future tragedies. As the sun set over the Arizona desert on the anniversary of Kathy's disappearance, Linda stood in the memorial garden and felt her sister's presence in the gentle desert wind. Kathy had found her adventure, though not the one she had planned. She had become a guardian angel for other travelers, her story serving as both a warning and an inspiration for those brave enough to seek their own adventures in an uncertain world. The mystery of Kathy Williams' disappearance had been solved, but her legacy lived on in the lives she had helped save and the awareness she had brought to the dangers that can hide behind even the most beautiful and peaceful seeming places. Her final adventure had taken her further than she ever could have imagined, and in the end, she had indeed found exactly what she didn't know she was looking for: the chance to make a difference in the world, even after she was gone. If this story has touched your heart, if you felt the fear, the hope, and the determination that Linda carried through her darkest days, please take a moment to connect with others who understand these emotions. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of people who believe in never giving up on those we love. Like this video if you felt Kathy's spirit and Linda's strength, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt that intuitive warning that something wasn't right? Have you experienced the power of a family's love to overcome impossible odds? Your stories matter, and this community is here to listen and support each other through the mysteries and challenges that life presents. Together, we honor those who are lost and celebrate those who fight to bring them home.